Hello, I'm Caleb Brown, and today I'm going to talk about synesthesia. Now, what is synesthesia? Well, coming from the Greek prefix synth, meaning together, and aesthesia, which is perception, synesthesia is the anomalous crossing of senses, such as tasting music or sound and hearing color. It comes in many forms, the most common of which is grapheme synesthesia, which is the association of letters and numbers with colors, and sometimes even gender and personality, which there's an example of this right here and here. You can see this shows, I guess, the personality and the gender of the letter and number. In this case, this person associates warmer colors with feminine characteristics. That's not always the case with most synesthetics, but in this case it is. So, synesthesia is 3 times more likely to occur in women than men. It can also be very helpful to with their memory, as they have multiple senses associating with one um, with one item or thing. So, especially with grapheme, if you have to remember a phrase, you have this whole a whole list of other senses and even personalities along with it. So, happy, for example, right? You have a feminine letter combined with another feminine letter, two feminine letters, and lastly another feminine letter. So happy is a girl word for this synesthetic. That's easy. That would make it easier for them to remember the sequence. So, next slide. Here we will learn how it occurs. So it's we don't really know. There's multiple theories about how synesthesia does occur, but we don't really have a true answer for that. Now, despite popular belief, it is not a memory, like a memory mnemonic device or something that improves memory. It is actually a whole new, unique way of experiencing the senses of the real world, and that's what makes synesthesia so interesting, as I'll cover later. But here we have neonatal pruning hypothesis that states babies have synesthesia. They experience everything in a synesthetic point of view because their neurons are messy and they're all connected together, and that at some point after about a about a month or 2 or 3, these synesthetes right here, these senses, non-synesthetes, I'm sorry, non-synesthetes have their sensory neurons cut or pruned away from other nerves. So for non-synesthetes, the only two neurosensory neurons would be connected to smell and taste, while synesthetes, it's to a lesser effect, it's to less intensity, so they'll have some lasting connection of sensory neurons to others. So that's there. Another hypothesis is that the limbic system has a large factor to do with it. It may produce more serotonin, which confuses these sensory neurons, allowing them to bounce back and forth. So right here, for example, you can see, I believe this is the hypothalamus. Once it produces serotonin information, that would travel to the visual cortex right here and to the rest of the brain. It gets confused. It bounces back and forth with multiple sensory cortexes here, allowing for a whole new experience to occur. For genetics, it is definitely genetic, right? So it is also hereditary. It's also been theorized to be a dominant trait, although you would think there'd be more people with synesthesia if that was the case. It's not contractable. However, rarely does it develop later in life for most people. And it can be the experience of synesthesia can be manufactured through the use of hallucinogenic drugs, which disturbs the brain's neurochemistry. This is hypothesized once again. So it confuses the neurochemistry in the brain, allowing signals to be passed freely between each sensory cortex rather than just being pruned off, like right here. So, next slide. What piqued my interest for synesthesia? Synesthesia, I think it's worth that everyone gives some sort of thought and kind of investigate synesthesia on their own, because it's really a truly different way of perceiving how a person would look around the world. So a person with, like I mentioned earlier, a person with grapheme synesthesia, they would associate words and remember, let's say, longer words much easier because they would associate that with a feeling or idea or concept. Now, concepts are an important part of synesthesia and the research going into synesthesia, as that is a very, very important part. I'll cover that next slide, but concepts are a very important part of synesthesia. There's also some questions to be asked about how it may improve job performance. Like, for example, who would you think would be better as a scientist, a normal scientist or a synesthetic scientist? They would have different frames of references and different perceptions of the world. It's just really interesting to talk about. It's an interesting subject, synesthesia. As I mentioned earlier, concepts are very important for synesthesia and conscious in general, and that is one of the biggest investigations of synesthesia nowadays for its future research. Hold on. Future research. I will go into past research later on, as that's just what I've learned from investigating synesthesia. One of the most critical reasons why researchers are interested in synesthesia is that can give insight into how our brain binds senses into a uniform whole concept. This is what I believe to be binding theory whenever I investigated it. So for example, you have these two flowers. This flower in particular, right? It has more intrigue to it, maybe more mystery. It's blue, it's darker, it's wider. You may even say it's more intimidating than this flower over here, which is much more welcoming and appears much more delicate, with its nice delicate little opening flat petals and its yellow interior right here. Now with synesthetic people, this experience would be heightened by some sort of association with that color, may it be taste, sound, or even words. Some reverse grapheme color synesthesia. Past 4 published experimental studies that attempted to induce synesthesia through the use of pharmacological agents. I'm gonna cut that out. These studies were carried out by psychologists Kelly in 1934, Simpson and McCullough 1955, and Hartman and Hollister in 1963, and Masters and Houston in 1966, respectively. We'll cover the first two. The other two. God. The other two mainly just go in research about how the pharmacological agents and medicine affects non-synesthetes and to give them a novel synesthetic experience. But really, to cut this all down, this large load of information, 4 non-synesthetes were put through a 7-week color tone association class while taking 15 grams of peyote cactus. This had little to no effect. Although they did associate a color with a sound, it didn't produce any sort of sense. It was really just memorization. However, they were interested. It started producing interesting results with this 1.2 gram of mesylkaline. It was this that started producing their own synesthetic novel experience for the non-synesthetes. But it didn't develop it, as they didn't associate the correct tone with the correct color. It was truly random. Now a second study, right, this was from, I believe, what was it? Simpson and McCullough. This one goes more into depth about how mesylkaline affects the brain for synesthetes and non-synesthetes. So they grabbed both synesthetes and non-synesthetes. They administered the mesylkaline, varying from 0.3 to 0.5 grams. Both experienced novel synesthetic events. Both experiments would lay the groundwork for research in hallucinogenics and neurotransmitters in general for the study of synesthesia. That pen's breaking it. So in conclusion, synesthesia is a condition that combines two or more senses into one. It is believed to be genetic and hereditary. It can rarely develop later in life and is caused by sensory neurons of their own cortex, sensory cortex, sending messages to other sensory cortexes. Future of synesthesia. The researchers are very interested in how synesthesia can help us understand the brain's ability to generate concepts within our consciousness. And the past of synesthesia. Researchers that knew about the condition of synesthesia tried to see it could be induced into non-synesthetics. This led us to gain the knowledge about how psychological drugs affect our perception and gives us synesthetic events. Thank you for watching.